there is a lot of speculation as to how the truce between India and Pakistan, which Indian officials are describing as a stoppage of firing, not a ceasefire, how was this brought about? Did America play a role in it? Trump's tweets seem to suggest that, but top government sources here in India say they vehemently deny that President Trump or the Americans had any role in bringing about this stoppage of fire. This is how the sequence of events played out, at least according to top Indian government sources. This is what brought Pakistan down to its knees and forced the DGMO of the Pakistan Army to pick up the phone and call his Indian counterpart, announcing a stoppage of fire. On the night of 9th of May, Prime Minister Modi spoke to US Vice President J.D. Vance. It was a phone call that went on for about an hour. Vance, in that phone conversation, described to Modi what he felt like was a big escalation that was coming India's way. Perhaps Vance was forewarned by American intelligence that Pakistan was preparing for a large-scale assault, one that would be launched on Friday night after the IMF announcement of a bailout package being cleared for Pakistan. In that telephone call between Modi and Vance, Modi patiently listened to Vance, but he did not commit to anything. He simply told Vance that if Pakistan continues firing, then India will also continue firing. India will not stop. In the words used by one Indian government official, this is what Modi said: "Wahan se goli chalegi, to yahan se gola chalega." A couple of hours after the Vance-Modi phone call, things escalated dramatically between India and Pakistan. Pakistan, in a coordinated assault, tried to attack more than 24 Indian military and civilian installations. The most dramatic attempts were to try and take down some of India's frontline air bases and air force stations. Some of these include Pathankot, Adampur, Udhampur, Sirsa, Jammu and Srinagar. But none of these Pakistani attacks were successful. In fact, all of them were foiled by India's strong air defenses. This, though, India could not take lying down. So on the 10th of May, in the early morning hours, India struck back at Pakistani air bases in retaliation. At least 11 Pakistani major and forward air bases were hit. Some of the extensive damage has now been captured in satellite images. The biggest hits were in the Noor Khan Air Base in Rawalpindi, what was previously known as the Chaklala Air Base, the Murid Air Base in Chakwal, the Rafiki Air Base, the Sargoda Air Base and the Jacobabad Air Base. India, through these strikes at frontline Pakistani air bases, had drawn a new red line: that no target in Pakistan was taboo anymore. India was willing to hit deep inside Pakistan, and particularly in the heartland, which is Punjab, or Pakistani Punjab, which is where a bulk of the top military establishment comes from. A couple of days before that, India had signaled that no terror target too was taboo for India, that it could hit deep inside Bahawalpur, the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Murid-ke, the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, both in the heart of Punjab. The hit on the Noor Khan Air Base, which was one of the biggest and oldest air bases in Pakistan, rattled the military leadership in Rawalpindi. It also happens to be very close to Pakistan's Strategic Command and Control Center, which oversees Pakistan's nuclear command. Now, this really rattled Pakistani generals. In fact, there are some reports even suggesting that General Asim Munir, the Chief of Army Staff, after the Noor Khan base hit, was moved to a specially designed nuclear protection bunker. After this, a rattled Pakistan goes crying to the United States of America. So subsequently, on the morning of the 10th of May, which was Saturday, there was a phone call by US Secretary of State and Acting National Security Advisor Marco Rubio to the Pakistan Army Chief, General Asim Munir. This was the first conversation that Marco Rubio has had directly with the Pakistan Army Chief, General Munir, since he came to office a few months ago. It was this call between Rubio and Munir that proved to be the game changer. By the morning of the 10th, which was Saturday, General Munir realized that the Pakistan Army was caught in a losing battle. That if India could take out some of Pakistan's strategic and forward air bases, then that takes away a huge tactical advantage away from Pakistan. The import of what India did to these forward air bases of Pakistan is that the Pakistani Air Force would be rendered ineffective. It couldn't scramble some of its frontline fighter jets. Its F-16s would have been rendered useless. In that phone call, Munir reportedly told Rubio, "Tell India that we will stop firing." A few hours later, Rubio then spoke to his Indian counterpart, Dr. Jaishankar. Rubio apprised the External Affairs Minister of his conversation with the Pakistani Army Chief. Rubio then told Jaishankar that Pakistan was willing to stop the firing. The External Affairs Minister, in response, told Secretary of State Rubio that India had only one condition, that if Pakistan stops the fire, then so will India. But if Pakistan continues to fire, then so will India. But there was one other important strategic calculation or messaging that needed to come through, and that is that this message that Pakistan will not fire needed to come from the official Pakistani channels to the official Indian channels without any third-party intervention or mediation. Now, one of the main and perhaps only operational military channels was the hotline between the two DGMOs, the Director Generals of Military Operation. So Jaishankar told Rubio that has to come through the official channels, which is the hotline between the two DGMOs. He also thanked the United States, but he said that we don't need American assistance. This has to be bilaterally dealt with between India and Pakistan. So subsequently, the Pakistan DGMO called the Indian DGMO at around 1 p.m. on Saturday. At that time, the Indian DGMO was not available to pick the call, and then subsequently, that conversation happened about 3:35. That is when, in that call between the two DGMOs, that is when it was agreed that Pakistan and India will stop firing from 5 p.m. Saturday. It was the power and military differential that made Pakistan come crawling to the negotiating table. Indian government sources say there was no question of any sort of American mediation. If anything, the Americans were simply messengers carrying messages from India to Pakistan and vice versa. But ultimately, what sealed the deal was General Munir realizing that the Indian air attacks had made mincemeat of his airfields, and there was no way that he could continue with this war and try to win this war by climbing the escalation ladder. Of course, one other thing happened to be a spoke in the wheels, which was a post that was put by the US President Donald Trump on his Truth social account that came around 5:30 on Saturday evening, which seemed to suggest that this whole thing was mediated by the United States between India and Pakistan. But Indian government sources say the call came from the Pakistani DGMO. It was bilaterally dealt with. It was Pakistan that raised the white flag after realizing the damage that the Indian military response had left in some of its major and frontline air bases. And at 6 p.m. on Saturday, the Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri announced to the world that India and Pakistan were entering into a stoppage of fire.